Hey everybody, happy Thursday! And it is book launch day for Ben, who's an author of Brigids Gate Press. And let me just say, I'm excited. We have people literally all over the world for this book launch, all to celebrate you, Ben, and your book, The Seething. I'm so excited to get to host it and to hear all of these stories and how everybody has come together. So with all of that being said, I'm going to kick it on over to Heather, and she's going to get things started.
Hi, everybody. Well, today's launch day for The Seething, and I thought we would just start by going around the grid. Everybody introduce themselves. I'll have Amy go first. Just remember to mute yourself when you're not talking, and try to remember to unmute yourself. And don't worry, people will flag at you if they can't hear you, so it's no big deal. I'm usually the most guilty. So, Amy, go ahead and introduce yourself, and we'll get started.
Oh, perfect. Yes. Well, I am Amy Ravichandran, and I am Ben's biggest fan. I have been helping in promotions and celebrations up until this point. And my counterpart is Mickey, who you will hear from here in a little bit, but I do book marketing. I'm owner of Abundantly Social and just helping authors strive, hit number one, and just see all their dreams kind of come true and celebrating their works that they put their heart and soul into, like Ben. So I'm so excited to be here and to host and to just get to know all of you guys. So that is me in a nutshell.
And I guess that's me next, huh? So, hi, I'm Ben, the author of The Seething. I'm glad to hear Amy say she's my biggest fan. I will note that I did just recently rewatch Misery, so I'm glad that she's also half a continent away. But I'm excited. This book is out. I'm hoping people enjoy it. It was a lot of fun to write. A bit of a roller coaster. It was kind of my keeping me sane through the couple of years of COVID project. And I hope you all enjoy it. And let's talk to who's next.
I'm Heather.
I'm Steve.
We're Brigids Gate Publishing along with Clyde, and we publish The Seething, so we're excited to be here. Mm-hmm. And there's really not a lot to say about us. We're just kind of boring book publishers.
Yeah, we're just old people.
Yeah, we're just old boring book publishers. Steph, you take it away.
Yeah. This is me going, I'm Stephanie Ellis, and I write for Brigids Gate. I've got The Woodcutter, a folk horror, coming out later in August, and I pulled together a short story collection called Devilkin, which will be out in May on the 15th to celebrate my 59th birthday. I thought last year in the 50s, before I hit the big 60 next year, I'll pull it together. So I've got that coming out. I was also privileged to be able to work on The Seething and did a bit of formatting, a bit of proofreading and various things. And I'm losing my words here, but I can actually say it is a really good book. And its small town setting reminded me very much of Stephen King. So if you like those sort of details, I think this is the book for you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Francesca Maria, and I am a member of Ben's Horror Writers Association, the local chapter here in the San Francisco Bay Area. We've known each other for a couple years, and I'm really happy to support him on his launch of The Seething. I was an early beta reader, absolutely loved it. Coming from California, he really captured those lake mountain town feels, how remote they are, how secluded they are, and it was absolutely a page turner. I like Ben, I'm a horror writer, and I've got a book also coming out from Brigids Gate Press called They Hide Short Stories to Tell in the Dark, and that's coming out April 7th.
Hello, everyone. I am Pace Warfield, and I am the creator and co-host of Horror Nerds at Church, which is a podcast that talks about horror movies mostly, sometimes some horror books as well, and the ways in which it intersects with queerness and religion, primarily since horror and religion tend to go hand in hand. But I have known Ben for, gosh, I don't even know how long. It's been almost 10 years at this point, probably a little bit less than that. But I used to live in California, and so reading The Seething really brought me back to California and to so many memories there. Now I'm in Minnesota, so different kind of horrors, especially around cold up here. But I'm glad to be here. And Horror Nerds at Church has a new season coming out. April 6th is our first episode. We will be talking about the Ghostbusters franchise throughout the season, as well as other kind of haunting and scary movies, ghost-related scary movies. So.
Hi, I'm Mickey Mickelson. I'm the owner of Creative Edge Publicity. I'm a Canadian publicist who focuses on traditional media outlets in virtually every area. I am the sole publicist for Brigids Gate Press. And just to put Ben at ease, I am also his biggest fan, so that we don't have a misery situation happening there. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for the support, Ben. You're wonderful. Your book is amazing. You're an incredibly marketable writer. And thanks to Brigids Gate Press as well for, number one, contracting me for all their projects, but just all the support overall. And nice to meet everybody and glad to be here.
Hi, everybody. Actually, I think there's possibly a gap in the market for a tag team misery scenario, don't you think? My name is Lee Murray, and I'm an award-winning writer, editor, poet from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I've known Ben, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years now, Ben, and we've had some short fiction published and a couple of books together, and so we got chatting about things. We both appeared on Pace's show, which was fantastic. I really loved that conversation. And of course, so I've been, a big fan of Ben's short fiction, so just couldn't wait for him to hurry up and put out a novel. So when he approached me and said, "Hey, Lee, would you like to read this and endorse it?" And by that stage, all the hard work had been done, right? The beta reading and the proofing, and, all of that. So I said, "Oh, absolutely." And so Heather and Steve very kindly sent me an ARC, and I absolutely loved it. I know everyone's saying it's sort of small town America, but actually I think there's something very universal about that small town insularity and the sort of, that sort of gothic feel of little towns where everyone knows everything, but nobody says. There's always a secret. And I think that Ben has captured that really well. So if you love that kind of story, this is the one for you. The cover art is fantastic. Anyway, I'm going to be quiet now.
Hi, everybody. I guess that leaves me. I'm MJ Pankey. I am an editor and an author, fantasy writer. I have a book coming out, Epic of Valentia. It's a ancient Greek-themed fantasy novel coming out in October. And I've edited a number of books for Brigids Gate, including The Seething and also their anthology coming out, Seers and Sibyls. I think that's going to be the title, but it's going to be fantastic. I loved working on The Seething with Ben. I really loved the folklore that he wove in. I'm a huge mythology nerd. And so when his novel started tapping into like the mythology of like Native American culture and stuff like that, and like land culture and stuff, I got really, really excited. So if that's your thing, this is definitely a must read. I really enjoyed it. It was awesome.
MJ, are you going to plug your book you've got coming out?
Yeah, I kind of did. I can plug it a little bit more.
A little bit more, and then we're going to circle back to Lee. Come on, guys.
Okay. So this is my book. It's Epic of Valentia.
All right.
It is coming out in October, and it is for fans of Greek mythology. It's got some meddlesome gods and a hidden heir and people on the run and treachery and all sorts of things in it. So if that's your thing, check it out. It's free to read on NetGalley right now and Book Sirens. So if anybody wants an ARC, they are available. So please do check it out.
Thanks. What about you, Lee? What do you got coming out this year? What do you got cooking? I think you got something to.
Well, actually, Black Cranes comes out today. Absolutely. So twin birthday. It's a re-release of our award-winning anthology of Asian diaspora horror fiction, and that's coming from the fabulous folk at Raw Dog Screaming Press, and it's in hardback. It's just stunning. Greg Chapman artwork and Todd Kesling interior. And I also have Unquiet Spirits, which came out 4 weeks ago, I think, from Black Spot Books. And this is a collection of essays by Asian women in horror, looking at Asian mythology and folklore and how it applies in our actual, real, everyday lives. So thank you, Catherine. Yeah, they're gorgeous covers. This was done in-house by Naj, who is Black Spot Books' cover designer. So yeah, gorgeous. Thank you very much for letting me plug my things.
So one of the things we usually start with is, and this is going to be an old story to tell soon, I think, but my mother read to us when we were children every night, regardless of how late she had to work, regardless of how sick she might be. And we were relentless listeners.
You and your sister.
Yeah, my sister and I. And we would beg for more chapters. And so every time we get a manuscript, I always read it. And at some point in the manuscript, I can start to hear my mother reading the story to me. And that's usually when I green light the manuscript. And it kind of irritates my other partners because they like to read the whole manuscript first before they're like, yes, this is a go. But
she might be 2 paragraphs in. It's like, yep, I want this book. And I'm like, okay, you haven't even finished chapter 1 yet.
And it can happen early or in the middle or late. It doesn't matter. But as soon as something in my brain switches into, like, because my mom did all the voices and she's a dramatic reader. So like she can set dread in any kind of story or make you kind of sit at the edge of the couch waiting for the moment. So I've got Ben's, and here it is. And I have dyslexia, so bear with me because I've chosen a paragraph. This is the paragraph where I heard my mother's voice, but it's got the letters that give me the trouble. So we'll see how I do. Lying on his back. Oh, wait, let me set it up. Our character is in the lake. And he's swimming. He's leaving the island and swimming towards, main shore. Lying on his back, he leaned his head forward and saw the island beyond his feet. He was about to turn over and begin a crawl stroke when he saw something dark, sinuous, but indistinct through the haze of his fever vision, slithering through the tree line in the distance. Mike turned onto his stomach and began to pull at the water with weak strokes of his arms. His legs kicked behind him, and he sliced into the water, panic rising in his chest. And I could hear my mother speeding up the cadence at the end of the paragraph. So that was the one for me. So that's what did it. But and this one actually came to us when I was recovering. And so Steve ended up actually reading most of this manuscript out loud to me. Instead of us reading it individually, because I didn't have the energy to stay awake and to read, especially since I love to read, but it can be kind of a struggle and exhausting for me. So, but yeah, so Steve, this is the only one that Steve and I read at the exact same time, I think. Probably.
Yeah, because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it used to be I would have to stay 2 hours past time I would like to be asleep, because I have to keep reading to her.
Right.
It's like if I start to stop and turn over and go to sleep, it's like no,
keep reading.
Like,
keep
pat
reading.
me on the shoulder. Come on, read some more.
Read some more.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's part of my charm.
Yeah. Until she falls asleep, then I can put the book down. And
Yeah, that's sad for Steve because he sleeps longer than I do. So
I can fall asleep in 10 seconds. Lay down and I'm out.
Yeah. So one of the things that I really loved about this book is it's kind of got some opening drama, and then it's got some slow burn and small town horror elements to it. And I am a huge fan of folk horror of any kind. But Ben's book, probably, you're going to correct me if I'm wrong, was probably the first folk horror book I read set in America. Don't you think? I mean, I guess if you count some of the witch stuff in New England, some of the history
Yeah.
witch stuff, horror books, but I think as far as, I think it is really, because I generally kind of tended towards.
Well, unless you count Children of the Corn.
Folk
horror.
As folk horror, listen,
Um,
y'all, I live in Kansas and it's real. Like,
Yeah.
there's a, let's tell funny folktale horror stories from our youth. Let's start with that as our conversation topic. I'll go ahead and start. So I used to read a ton of horror, and of course, I think like a lot of us who are especially American, it started with Stephen King at probably way too young an age. And we used to, every summer, we used to drive to Dallas and drive back to Kansas City, and we would spend 2 weeks down with my grandparents in Texas, and then my aunt, who's only 2 years older than me, would come up and spend 2 weeks with us in Kansas City, and our uncles would kind of take turns chauffeuring us back and forth. So this one time, instead of taking I-35, because there was a ton of road construction, I was probably 12 or 13, and I was reading the short story collection that had Children of the Corn for the first time, and we took a back county highway, which between Texas and Kansas, there are several of them, and they are all equally as creepy as hell, especially in the summer when the corn is really high. Because the one thing you know, if you live in an agricultural community, is you don't play in corn like they do in movies, because you could for real get lost for days in a large enough cornfield. I mean, this is the land of corn and wheat, so you don't play once it gets above your own chest level, you don't go in again. And so I was reading Children of the Corn. My uncle had misjudged how far we could make it on one take of gas. And he's like, we're going to have to pull over in this small town, middle of nowhere, farming community, Kansas, and get gasoline. And which is fine, but we roll into town and it's been nothing but cornfields, but we roll into town and it's cornfields on either side. Now, I'm nearly at the end of this short story in the back of the car. And there's literally the only building in the town that is not a house is there's a farm. We call them warehouses or Kansas castles. So there's one of those because there's a railroad. And there's I'm going to usually use the word gas station because they only sell diesel for tractors. I mean, like, this is for true a farm community. So my uncle's like, okay, well, we're going to have to try to make it to the next town 18 miles away, but everybody use the bathroom here so we don't lose more time. And I'm just going to tell y'all, I took one look around me and I was like, I'm not getting out of the car here or anywhere that looks like here. So I'll just hold it until we get back to a bigger town. I'm fine. And my aunt, who we were switching Stephen King short story books, she had literally just read Children of the Corn, and she was like, I'm not getting out either. Like, we're good. As a matter of fact, we don't think we should stop anywhere where there's corn. Let's only stop and let's drive on to the next wheat town. So, but okay, so Ben, you start. What was your first? Do you have a childhood or a teenage year folk horror story?
Oh my gosh. Well, I do. What you made me think of, I've got this line. I don't know where I came up with this. Maybe it'll be the first line of a short story someday. But I've used it a few times, which is if a lifetime of watching horror movies has taught me anything, it's that nothing good happens in a cornfield. As far as, I don't know, childhood folk horror trauma, no, and as a kid, as an adult, I used to love being outside. I spent hours of my childhood hiking around Tilden Park up in the Berkeley Hills, the East Bay Hills. A lot of the scenery from that informs the Seething, the East Bay Hills in general. Nothing really weird, like spooky like that ever really happened to me as a kid. It's funny. I guess I read so much that's where all my horror came from, reading, Lovecraft and King and Barker and all the classics when I was growing up. But if I think of something really weird, I'll let you know. I used to be afraid of the water. That's one thing. Again, back to the Seething. I never liked, even as an adult and all the way back as far as I can remember, I never liked swimming anywhere where I couldn't see like past my knees. If I'm in the water and I can't see what's down there, I was always convinced there'd be, snapping turtles in the water that would bite off my toes, or weird snakes or something. And I think a lot of that comes up, since you've all read it, a lot of that comes up in the Seething. I think my dislike of deep water, dark water anyway.
Steph, you go next. You guys better have some weird folk horror stories. I can't be the only one.
Well, it's not really folk horror story. It's more growing up with things around me that gave off those sort of vibes. So there was always something a little bit spooky just over my shoulder. I mean, growing up in the cider house, this rural pub in the middle of nowhere, it's part of it was an old cottage, about 100 years old, and then it had some buildings built onto it as well. But my dad put up all sorts of things around the wall in the building, and we had these old cider presses, and there was a crossbow that had been made safer, but there were also things like traps, animal traps that, and various bits and bobs that you wouldn't put out these days. So there's that sort of element of knowing that there was a cruelty around you all the time. I mean, the farmers were lovely. they were great, but and then the vibe where during the day it'd be so busy in the pub, especially in the summer, and then as soon as they'd gone, it was quiet. It was just silence. Then you'd hear the owl hooting, or the branches would brush the glass. And then in the autumn, there was a time when we don't have the cornfields like you had, but the crops, when there was just the stubble left in the fields, they would burn them. You're not allowed to do that over here anymore because of the Clean Air Act. But then you would get the whole countryside area around where we were, it'd be just smoke and mist. You couldn't see anything. And the moments before a storm when it all goes dead silent. So there are always these little elements that make you think, oh, it's not quite what you think it is. They were all there around you as you grow up. So nothing specific happened, but all those elements that feed into my folk horror stories, all the strange characters, the people, they sort of built that picture for me. Some of our regulars are in there in different forms, not quite in the horrific aspect, but I can see their faces there in some of the skills that they show. Like there's the short story I did, The Way of the Mother, and you've got Johnny Hedgerow. He was based on one of our barmen who used to go out to the fields that were linked to the pub, and he would create the hedges in the old-fashioned way. So it's all little bits of elements of the past and the way things were done, and nature being around you. So it wasn't folk horror per se, but it was the things that build that up, so you know how to add in a few extra chills that way.
Francesca, you're up.
Am I up? So if I may bend it a little bit and add cryptids to folk horror. So like Ben, I grew up in California, and a lot of people think of California as Hollywood, LA, San Francisco, very urban. Most of California is just forest, uninhabited. The Sierra Nevadas are thick. And so on vacations, we would go as kids, we'd go up into the high Sierras where there's little mountain towns, not a lot of people around, maybe one store within 50 miles. And this one particular cabin we went up to was supposedly roamed by Sasquatch or Bigfoot. And I had 4 older brothers and sisters, and they always teased me about, did you hear that in the woods? Did you hear that? Did you hear that? And don't stay out late at night because Bigfoot might come out and eat you. And I remember one particular hot summer night, we were out on a cabin and we would see bats flying around. It was just dusk and it was getting really kind of eerie outside. The air was getting thick. Something was changing around us. And we started to hear this like high-pitched, weird cry in the distance that didn't sound like a bird, didn't sound like any other animal. And my older brothers and sisters said, that might be Bigfoot. We should probably get back into the cabin now and close the doors. So who knows what it was out there, but it definitely left us feeling very unnerved. And I definitely slept with the lights on that night.
I got to quickly ask, Francesca, have you ever been to the Bigfoot Museum in Santa Cruz?
Yes, of course I have.
Okay, because I haven't, and I really want to go
Awesome.
someday. So, is it as awesome as I imagine?
It's good. You have to go.
Thanks.
Yeah, we'll go together.
Nice. We'll do it.
I guess my turn then. So I grew up in Maryland, a rural Frederick County of Maryland, and there's a lot of Civil War locations up and down the Potomac River, including Gettysburg, where I got my master's degree from and stuff. So all sorts of like related to the lore around Civil War battle ghosts and all that stuff was part of my childhood, visiting places like Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, stuff like that. But there are kind of two formative things in my early childhood. The first is the book Wait Till Helen Comes by Mary Downingham. And that my mom is a pastor. And in that book, it's set in rural Maryland town, like where I lived. And the main character moves into a church, her family moves into a church, which, and use that as a residence. And then it turns out that it's haunted. So my mom going to all these rural churches to be a pastor, I always would think of that book. And then the other thing, though, which is more along the lines of folklore, is Burkittsville is in Frederick County, and Burkittsville is most famous for like popular imagination for the Blair Witch Project, because it was supposedly set in the Burkittsville woods. But I would grow up. As I was growing up, like my house was immediately surrounded by cornfields to go along with all the corn horror we were just talking about. But then on the way to school, we would pass this wooded section on the school bus. And my friends and I always would tell stories to each other about ghosts or shadows or all sorts of things that we thought we would see in the woods, especially during winter when it would get dark early on our way home from school. And so it was very interesting to me when I moved out of that region, out of the Burkittsville, like Middletown Valley region, and moved to Maryland, to Columbia, Maryland, more suburban area. And this movie, The Blair Witch Project, comes out, set in the very woods that my friends and I would always be talking about seeing all sorts of shadowy creatures and ghosts and stuff like that. So it was like, I knew it. I knew there was something about those woods growing up. So that's my kind of childhood brush with folk horror and telling legends among my friends.
Mickey, what about you? You got a folk horror teenage childhood?
My childhood traumas were based on films, so I'm going to reference that if I can. Yeah. I was really scared of the Wicked Witch in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs as a little kid. So much so that I wouldn't eat apples for the first 5 to 6 years of my life with the fear that I would get poisoned. And that was one thing. And then my mom, in her brilliance, decided to take me to Jaws when I was like 6 years old. So I saw Jaws in the theater. And actually, to this day, I'm like Ben. I will not go in the ocean for fear of losing my limbs, fear of being bitten in half, just fear of running into, well, our good friend Bruce. So that's those are my honesty aspects for this. So yeah.
I got to interject one more time, Mickey. I'm with you on Jaws. I didn't actually see Jaws until I think I was in my late teens. The movie came out in '76. I was aware of things. The ads for that movie scared me so bad. Like it was awful. So the whole idea of the shark and everything, it was just terrible. So
I've never gone into the ocean, and I blame Spielberg. So we'll just go.
Oh yeah. Well, I often thank our stars. I think about the fact that our ancient ancestors evolved legs and lungs and walked the hell out of the ocean, and I should just honor their choices by not going back in, because I've seen stuff that's in the ocean, and no thank you.
Yeah, blame Spielberg, and we'll blame Disney for their lack of Apple sales for me for my first 6 years of my lifetime. So
there you go.
That's my honesty for today.
Okay.
Lee, what about you?
I'm going to say that just proves the power of literature to impact social change, does it not? But I'm from down here in New Zealand, and I'm going to say that obviously folklore applies to landscape and uncanny things that happen surrounding our landscape, as Stephanie said. And I think about someone like Catherine Mansfield, who's one of our most iconic writers, and she talks of the savage land that made her frightened in her short story, very famous short story, The Woman at the Store. And I think that's really true about New Zealand. And the Maori people here have just a word for it, it's called tupua, which is just uncanny things. It's the log in the river that won't sink, and those kinds of things. And here in New Zealand, honestly, there's just no separation between the landscape and the people. And it's just, the veil is very thin here for everybody. So for Maori people, for example, the landscape, the rivers and the mountains and the forest, they are ancestors. They are the people's ancestors who have nurtured and protected them throughout the ages. And so those things have real, they're real entities, they're real people here in New Zealand. And in fact, we have laws enacted to make those real people. So the forest, the Te Wera forest down in Hawke's Bay, which has been so badly affected recently by the dreadful cyclone Gabrielle that came through in January, that is actually an legal entity in its own right. So folklore is embedded in our lives here in New Zealand. And I'll tell you, actually, Francesca, that I live 30 minutes from the last reported sighting of a Monroe, which is a New Zealand Bigfoot. And I live 40 minutes this way from probably the most haunted site in New Zealand, which is the site of the eruption of Mount Tarawera in the 1800s. What happened there was a Maori guide was taking a group of European visitors to see the beautiful pink and white terraces, which were the 8th wonder of the world in its time. And there was a sesh at the river, at the lake, and the water pulled away, and the Maori rowers, the oarsmen who were taking the boat out to see these pink and white terraces, were terrified. They thought it was an omen, and they did not want to take the boat out. But in the end, the guide said, yes, we'll do it, we'll go. And so off they went. And they all of them saw a waka, which is a canoe, with ghost warriors in it wearing dog head masks. And I've actually written a novel, a novella about this because it just is too wonderful not to, this fabulous piece of folklore. And that particular sighting, and of course, it's really interesting because it was printed in the paper. The testimonies of these people who survived, who went off, this tourist went off afterwards and said, we saw these ghost people. And it's been, and nobody believes it if it's the locals that say, there was these ghosts. But because these very distinguished European visitors, said that it happened, then it must have happened. And then, the next day, or I think a couple of days later, the mountain erupted and the pink and white terraces were destroyed. And a lot of, I think there was something like 30 or 40 little villages in the area were decimated. So, I live in a country where it's just, folklore is just completely real. It's part of our everyday life. We talk about taniwha, which are serpent monsters, Francesca, that live around, you know, they're the hairy dragons of New Zealand. And if the Maori say there's a taniwha in this place, we don't build a road there. You know, we don't build a road there because, you know, it's just to invite some kind of misfortune. So yeah, I love folklore. It's just part of the fabric of life here in New Zealand. Bring it on.
What about you, MJ? What do you got?
Well, I don't have anything as awesome as that for sure.
We go last. I should have known.
So I'm from the southeast US, and we have this invasive vine thing here called kudzu. And this weed or vine, you can actually eat it, oddly enough, but it grows over everything and it covers everything. And it's terrifying to see just how it just goes crazy and covers up everything. And as a kid, we would drive by and it's growing all over the roads, and sometimes we would go just exploring and just looking at things, looking at old villages or looking at old towns that, you know, my dad said he used to come to as a kid and whatever. And you know, these dried up little towns, and the buildings are just covered in kudzu. And there's almost, you can't really even tell if anything's happening. And I remember thinking as a kid, like, how terrifying it would be to like go in there and like maybe find like some dead bodies or something. Or like in 5 years, how you wouldn't even know that there was a town there at all, because it just covers over everything and you can't see anything. So it's not necessarily folklore, just more of like a creepy crawly child phobia thing that I had. But yeah, if you've never seen pictures of kudzu, just Google it, and it's scary looking. That's all I have.
Yeah. Google at your own risk. Amy, what about you? You got a childhood or teenage book or movie that creepy crawled you out for something, or apparently Family Vacation?
I guess I have like a movie. So I watched The Hills Have Eyes. I don't know if you guys have seen that. I watched that when I was like, I don't know, little-ish. And then my sister ended up moving to Midland, and you had to go through all of these like deserted towns. And I wouldn't get out. I wouldn't do anything. I was like, nope, I'm not dying here today. So that's pretty much all that I have. And it's traumatized me. I will not watch another one. And I will not do car rides out to West Texas, because that's where you see them. And I'm good in, you know, the south part of Texas. I'm good. And I refuse to go near deserted towns. I just can't do it. No.
West Texas does that to everybody, I think, whether you've seen that movie or not. All right, what's your creepy crawly?
Okay, well, this is kind of a folk horror kind of thing. First of all, I grew up in New Orleans, and there's a lot of stories and legends and creepy things and creepy history there. But I can't remember the name of the cemetery, but about 1.5 miles, 2 miles from where I live, there was one of the cemeteries there. And if you've never been to New Orleans, all of their cemeteries are above ground crypts. They don't have any plots dug down into the ground. And, you know, back then there were all kinds of stories about, you know, some kid had crossed through the cemetery at night and never come out again. His friends heard him scream and nobody ever saw him again. Going to, you know, sometimes the dead will come up and the ghost will drag you down back into their crypt with them. There's just all kinds of stories. And I think a lot of it was older kids trying to scare the younger ones too. But I will say, back in the 1800s, if you look back at the history, and this adds to the folklore of the area, because of water under the ground, we have, if you dig down in any yard in New Orleans, it'll start filling up with water because of how wet the area is. Well, at one point, they had to redo a lot of the cemeteries because the coffin, at that time, they were burying them in the ground. The coffins started coming up through the ground. And it was just because of the water level pushing them up, and they started going more and more to above ground crypts. Well, anyway, when I was a kid, one of the dares that a lot of kids would do is at night to run through the cemetery alone. You'd climb the fence on one side and run through all the crypts and come out the other side, and your friends would go around the block and wait for you. And it was kind of a rite of passage. And so I did it. I hopped the fence, and they're these big 6 to 7 foot, to me back then, I thought they were 12 foot high, but they must have been only 6 or 7 foot high wrought iron fences with the spikes on the fancy spikes on top. So I climbed it, got over
to
it.
keep children out. I mean, like,
Yes,
that's why they
I'm
put them there.
sure.
Yeah. Okay.
But they also look really cool. But I ran through, and I probably wouldn't have gone as fast, except something in there. I did hear something moving around, and I could swear it was coming up behind me. And of course, in my mind, it's, hands coming up through the earth, a body pulling itself out, crypt door opening, whatever. I'm sure it was probably just a raccoon or a possum or something, but I never ran so fast in my life. I sprained my ankle at one point, and I messed it up even worse because I didn't stop.
Yeah.
And I made it through.
That's funny. I
Yeah.
didn't know that story until years after we had been married, but I have a great grandmother who spent some time in kind of the Arkansas hills, and well, I'm not going to tell this whole story, but I went to her gravesite and took some cemetery dirt home with me. And
Never a good idea.
Steve goes, I got back in the car and he goes, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Well, it's her birthday, so we're just exchanging dirt." And he's like, no, put that out of the car. We're not doing that. Do not bring anything from the cemetery home. Nothing. Like, go shake your clothes out, put the jar back. Don't be a weirdo. Don't be that person. So I don't do it. I didn't do it after that. He refused to pull out of the cemetery. He was like, we're not doing it. But it's just something
Amen.
it's
Thank
just something my people did. I don't know why, but yeah, we don't do it anymore. The chain broke with us. But
you go into the cemetery and you leave things. You don't take them out. Never a good idea.
So Ben, what do you think? What was it? Was it the water horror that inspired you to start the Seething, or was it small town horror, or both? Like, what was it about? Because the water part, I didn't know if Steve was going to make it when it became clear to him that it was a water beastie. Because I don't know that he's never been in the ocean with me, and I swim out in the ocean. But
I've seen too many bad things.
Steve
happen.
paces the shore and waits for me to come back. Like, he won't even get up to his knees. So
I'd say it was kind of a lot of all of that. Yes to all. The inspiration for the Seething, I guess, I've told this story recently a few times. So I'll tell it again here for those of you who haven't heard it yet. We were having one of our California drought cycles a few years ago, and there's a lake near my house that I really enjoy hiking around and running the trails around there. And you can basically do a circuit of the entire lake. And over a couple years, and then really over a few months toward the end, I started noticing the lake water was getting lower and lower and lower and lower. And there are these floating piers, I guess, that sit on the water, and they would go up and down, with the rise and fall of the lake. And at one time, middle of the summer at some point, the water had gotten so low that these piers were essentially, they weren't on water anymore. They were lying right on the dirt. The water had receded that far. And just because of the way my brain works, the thought that popped into my head was, if there's a monster on that lake, it's sure a lot closer to the surface now. It's going to be a lot easier to get people. And then I started thinking about, in general, the ecosystem of that lake, and how there are, herons and crayfish and snakes and all the stuff that live there. And the water was getting smaller, and where are they going to go? Where are these critters going to go to survive? And again, if there's a monster on that lake, what is it going to do to try to get out of its habitat? If its habitat's receding, where's it going to go? And the details of the book don't quite match that specifically, but that really was kind of the inspiration for the thing. And then as far as the small town stuff goes, it just, when I started writing it, it seemed like, if I set this story around that specific lake in the town I live in, the characters aren't really as isolated. I need to get them, I guess, kind of literally fish out of water situation. I need to get them out of their regular habitat where they usually live, put them someplace where they're not really familiar with the lay of the land. And so that's where this town of Golden Oaks and the Oro Lake area came from. And that's all an amalgam of various places that I've been to in the California, in the mountains, towns like Lockford and Jackson, where my in-laws used to live, were very inspirational. The area up around Tahoe was also, a big inspiration to the story.
That's interesting. I don't know. I was just trying, when you were talking about, small town also being part of the inspiration, I started thinking about horror stories that take place in big cities.
Mm-hmm.
And I know they have to exist, but of course I've come up with exactly 0 in like the 1 minute it took me to think about it. So, which kind of makes me wonder, what is it about small towns? Is it because they're isolated communities? Like, what makes a small town the perfect setting for horror? Anybody can answer. What makes it the perfect setting?
Anybody?
Well,
I think it's the isolation, isn't it? And I mean, even that little piece that you read out, Heather, from Ben's story, it sounds so Lovecraftian, with the slithering, and you talked about slicing through the water, and it just has that very Lovecraftian feel. And of course, Lovecraft talked about that, didn't he? He said it was that uncertainty, it was the scrape of, I can't quote it exactly, but it's in his supernatural treatise or whatever it is. And he talks about the scrape of branches, on the window, that kind of that isolation and uncertainty, and the fact that we just don't know. There's no one to see, and we're on our own. There's no one to see. I just feel that Ben's really delved into that whole notion of isolation and loneliness, and just no one can see this. You're on the other side of the lake on a little island, stuff is happening, and no one knows you're there. I think that is part of it. It's a bit like the corn, isn't it? You can go into the corn, no one can see you. You can be just a step away from people, but no one knows you're there, and therefore no one knows the monster is there either. So I think that is perhaps what's made Ben's story particularly nice, is because it really draws on those elements.
Yeah, I think there's also the idea that small towns, rural communities, or just the countryside, or any sort of place outside the city in general, is supposed to be perfect. We've got this idea of it being this lovely place that we want to go to, and you go there and then bad things happen. It's that juxtaposition of what you expect. You've got this ideal, and then when you set a horror story or anything there, you completely undermine it, you subvert it totally. And I think it's that contrast which really adds to horror that's set in a small town, or a village or a hamlet or the middle of nowhere.
And I will also just add, as a queer person, there's a level of rural America that is horrific in and of itself for people who from marginalized communities by and large. And so that always kind of adds an edge to that. And I know early on in the book, there's as the main characters are traveling to the town, there's already like a confrontation with a local and stuff like that, and just how realistic that danger feels for someone like me and others. So that's part of it too, I think.
That's true, especially in America. Like, the smaller town, the more rural a town you get, the more danger you could be in if you don't fit in the normal norm of that small town's definition of personhood. You definitely put you at risk. But even being the wrong religion, can put you at risk in a small town, at least in our part of the world. But if you roll into a Baptist town as a Catholic, don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and growing up in Louisiana, maybe it's different in other states, but down there, everybody knows if you leave New Orleans, you go drive west through Louisiana, you don't really stay in the little towns out there unless you're just getting gas and moving on. Because if you haven't grown up there and you don't know people there, you're not welcome.
Yeah, that's
true.
true.
There's a definite, stay out. If you're not part of this community, don't come
In the
here.
swamps.
Yeah.
Yeah, that and they have alligators that just come up to your
Yeah.
car. I mean,
Well, and that's part of it is, you could go out into the swamp, disappear, and nobody would ever find you. So,
and nobody even know you were missing. Like the swamp just reclaims everything down there.
Yeah.
The only time I've been down there, Steve had family that relocated. I don't even know the name of the town. It doesn't exist on Google Maps, just so you know. And
I think it's like Borgian or something.
I don't know.
But yeah,
But
anyway.
his cousin was late to lunch because there was an alligator on her front porch.
And she had to wait for it.
She had to wait for it to, wander off. And I was like, that's not like no part of anything that's happened today is normal, but I'm getting in the car now. Like we don't belong here. So if you guys ever hear my swamp story, that's it. I was using Google Maps and Steve had carefully written down weird directions on how to get there. And then all of a sudden Google Maps was just like, it was just like, and we're done. Like the roads disappeared. My little red dot disappeared. And I'm like,
it vaguely
can't
showed
go
an
places.
arrow in the middle of nowhere. It's like,
I live in Kansas, which is the middle of nowhere. We don't go to places that don't exist on Google Maps. Like that's not where we go on purpose. But that was a good time. But it was, and we finally had to call your uncle to come and get us.
He had to come out to the next nearest town, meet us, and then we followed him back.
I can only follow the directions, turn left at the second green bridge so many times before I'm like, this is not, like they don't even name the roads here. This is not, there's nothing reasonable about where we're going. Right. That's the place where I got creeped out by the water because they live really close to a canal. And we got out of the car and I told Connor and I was like, do not even look at it. Just head right to the house. And I'm not afraid of water. Like I'll swim in the creepiest water ever, but the water doesn't, and I saw Jaws as a kid, but I didn't believe that a great white would bother me any.
Well, Jaws bothered me some, and I've never wanted to go in the ocean after that, but also I'm sure probably a lot of you have read the story, The Raft, I think it is, by Stephen King, and what was the second story collection? I can't remember now. But that one, it's a small pond or a little small lake out in the middle of nowhere, and there's a creature out there in the lake, and these friends get stuck out on a raft out in the middle of a lake trying to figure out how they're going to get back to the shore and get to safety. Mm-hmm. And that bothered me more than anything else. It's like I will not swim in rivers or lakes. Nope.
So I assume, Ben, you're not a river or lake swimmer then? You don't go in, it's swimming pools only?
I'll wade a little bit, but, and the clearer the water, the better. I'm thinking of places, and actually a lot of the places, the lakes near us have been unswimmable for the last few years because of the drought conditions. Again, we've had this toxic blue-green algae bloom. So really any place, even like, Lake Anza up in Tilden Park that I used to swim at sometimes when I was a kid, you can't even go in there anymore. And the ocean, for those of you who aren't from the San Francisco Bay Area, the ocean here, it's just too damn cold. I'll maybe stick my feet in it once in a while, but even in the middle of summer, it's just too cold. My kids, my wife love it, but no, it's too cold for me.
What about everybody else? We'll do a quick survey before we wrap up. Are you river, lake, ocean swimmers, or is it clear water and swimming pools only?
Swimming pools only.
I used to swim in the creek when I was a kid, and then my sister got bit by a turtle. And since then, I'm like, no. Nope.
My dad had a sailboat, so we would go sailing in the Chesapeake Bay, and one of the most scary memories I still have to this day is getting kelp wrapped around my foot. And so reading your book, Ben, brought those memories back in so many gross ways. So yeah, swimming pools here too.
I was just going to say, I stay out of the water completely. I don't swim. I can save my life and nobody else's. But I was pushed in the deep end of the swimming pool at my very first swimming lesson when I was at primary school. And I remember being under the water and looking up and hearing the instructor saying, "She's all right, she can get herself out." And I did. But after that, I would stay down the shallow end. I wouldn't go anywhere else. And it took me a long time to learn to swim. But even then, I just stay well away. I don't like water on my face if I can help it. It's just, ugh. So, yeah, I can sort of swim on my back a bit and probably save my own life. But everybody else, I'm afraid you're on your own.
Well, you guys, I don't know. I mean, you guys have read too many scary books, okay? Because I will go in the ocean, the river, anything like that. And I've seen Lake Placid, okay? And I'll still go in a lake. Even though you can't see anything and you don't know what you're walking on, I will swim in it now. I can't swim. I doggy paddle, so I cannot save anybody. So please don't rely on me because I can't do that. I'm doing good to stay afloat. I can't float, do anything. But if there is a body of water near me, I am in it. I am a water person through and through.
Well, I will do ocean, river, lake, and and swimming pool, any body of water. I love water, and we're surrounded by it here in New Zealand, so we don't have much choice. My father was a surf lifesaver in his day, and he taught swimming. And my mother couldn't swim, being a little Asian woman. And when one day my dad had this dream that all four of us, that he was a big boaty and everything. We had boats and what have you. And he had this dream that that the boat capsized and we were 4 kids. And he said to my mother, "You need to learn to swim," because I had this dream that I was trying to hold up 4 kids and I couldn't do it on my own. So you need to learn to swim. But so we're all of us swimmers, and surf, I did life-saving, medals at school because Dad was big in swimming. I think that's just what happens when you live near water. You don't have much choice. You kind of have to learn to swim or die. So but I have to say that in Tauranga, where I live in the Bay of Plenty, yes, we have frequent sightings of great white sharks. And just north of here last year, someone was mauled by a shark. So yeah, it happens. And, you kind of, when they say get out of the water, you get straight out.
Yeah, no, I would be fine sitting well back from the water and watching the great whites. I'll wave to them, but that's it. I'm not getting in to say hello.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Connor used to get in the water, but my dad and my stepmom live in Florida, and we were down there, I don't know, it was spring break or something, and we were down there and they had closed the beach because there's a great white migration, and so they were too close to the beaches. So like all the way up and down the beach on that side,
Tiger shark, actually.
Was it tiger shark or
Tiger
great
shark,
white?
yeah.
Whatever it was. Cutter just texted me and he's like, never getting in the ocean again. All the beaches are closed because there's a shark migration, and apparently they just chomp on people during migration week. And I was like, well, I mean, don't go in if the beach is closed, but you'll probably okay other than that. And he was like, no. Turns out Dad was right. We're never going in the water again. But I mean, listen, I grew up landlocked, so there's no clear water in Kansas, guys. If you can see the bottom, it has been chemically treated in some way, and that's what gives you pause. If you're a Kansan, you're like, oh dear, I can see my feet in the bottom of that lake. No, that's probably not safe. We probably shouldn't swim there. But so it doesn't bother me.
Well, story I like. So Heather and her sister, they'd seen the movie Jaws, and they were terrified of it. And one tactic that her father used to keep them out of swimming pools at night, to make sure they weren't swimming out there when there weren't any parents around, is her father told her sharks are able to come through water pipes, and because their bodies are made of cartilage, they can squeeze through, and at nighttime they'll get in the swimming pools, and
Right.
you won't see them until they get in there and they'll get you. So don't ever go there
So here's the
at
truth.
nighttime by yourself. And they never did. They were scared
I
to death
still
of
will not swim in a swimming pool after dark. Even if it's well lit up, to this day, I will not swim in a swimming pool after dark. But
Right.
yeah, that's where it's very clear. And chemically treated, I might add.
Right.
So, but yeah, that's you gotta love my dad. Any kind of horror story to keep us in our beds, but because I didn't sleep a lot as a child, and I was a sleepwalker as a child. So my childhood was basically my parents trying to figure out how to booby trap us in.
So one last, one last question I wanted to put too on Ben as we're
Wrapping up
here. Is there anything you'd like to say to all your readers to finish up, to your fans? So.
Well, obviously, I sure hope you all like this book. There's a lot of work put into it, not just me, but everyone else you're seeing here on the screen in various forms. If you like slow burn, small town horror, if you like maybe a unique monster that you haven't seen before, and if you just want a book that you can absolutely kill spiders with, it's a big fat one. I definitely think you should check it out. And I think MJ mentioned earlier that the Net Gallery situation. We've got, look, Francis got the book right there. It's huge. We've got some copies to give away still on Book Sirens, right, for reviewers. So if you're looking to get a freebie, check out Book Sirens. And I believe the ebook is 99 cents on Amazon for a few more days.
99 cents for a few more days. Yeah. So it'll go off sale probably on Monday, but 99 cents for the ebook for a few more days. And the link to Book Sirens is on our website for this evening.
So grab it now, and next week you'll be able to tell all your friends that you read it before it was cool.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. I really appreciate it. I love launch day. So
much fun.
I think we'll wrap up. I know Lee's got to get out. Lee's got her day to start while the rest of us ease into our evening or bedtime.
For sure. Well, Ben, we're all excited for you. We're all here to support. So you guys go, and the link is in the comment section below to get your ebook copy for 99 cents today and for a couple more days. But until then, everybody, thank you guys so much for joining us. Go out and support Ben. Leave a review. It's the kindest thing you can do for any author. But until then, bye, everybody.